Adjunct Professor Moran, Microeconomics 112. The unit we're beginning now is one on why people trade or countries trade at all. And the concept that explains this is called comparative advantage. So, the reason that people trade, now this is a macroeconomics issue and a microeconomics issue. If we discuss why individuals trade, you'll find that in the microeconomics part of a textbook. When countries trade, it's found in the macroeconomics part of the textbook, but the same concepts explain individuals trading and countries trading. Trade between individuals and nations results in an increase in the productivity of a nation's resources. Okay, so people are going to specialize based on the resources they have. The resources of the world are not equally distributed to all the countries. So if a country has more of one resource, natural resource for example, they'll make things that require natural resource. When another country has skilled labor, they'll make things that require skilled labor. By specializing in the resources they have, they're going to be able to produce more and trade for what they need than if they just tried to produce everything themselves. Right, so increased productivity of a nation's resources, allowing it to specialize, will increase its production, and then when they trade, they may be better off as a result, having more of both goods than they could produce on their own individually. And Adam Smith describes this as, you don't want to be a jack of all trades, master of none. Specialize in something, get really good at it, produce a surplus, and then trade it for the things that you're not so good at making. There's no time wasted between tasks, and it allows the specialized use of equipment. So Adam Smith explained this by using the example of a pin maker, because that was a big industry in the 1700s, the manufacture of textiles. Not necessarily clothing, but the fabric that made the clothing. And so a pin maker would have to find the tin ore to make pins out of. Then he would have to smelt it. He'd have to extrude it into a long strand. Turn that off. Turn that workstation off. Go to another workstation. Snip the long string of tin into strips. Then he would have to go to another workstation and poke holes in the eyes to make eyes in the pins. And so workstations aren't being used. He's got to be a generalist on the use of all this equipment. A tin maker has to stop and start going between workstations. And so Adam Smith suggested it was just better if you have one guy specializing in making the tin, one guy extruding it, one guy cutting it, one guy putting the eye holes in. Now this specialized piece of equipment, an example of that, you ever wonder how car parts get the curves in them? There's a machine that's called a Verson stamping machine. It's about 49 foot tall. If you stand your house on end, it's probably not as tall as that. And it weighs as much as 12 locomotives. It costs $30 million for this Verson stamping machine. It comes down and it presses sheets of steel into the shape they want them for cars. Now, this machine can make parts in just 5 minutes compared to 8 hours for an older stamping machine. So if you're going to spend $30 million for a machine, the last thing you want is the thing to be sitting around not doing anything, because it's very expensive. You could use the older, less expensive, less efficient equipment. So only if you're really specializing and producing a lot of output does the purchase of specialized equipment become affordable or cost effective, as we'll see in later units on costs. So nations will determine what they're going to be specializing in. So a lot of the land comes from Australia and New Zealand. They have natural resources. Japan has skilled labor, so a lot of things, of course, skilled labor come from Japan. It's hard to show with the United States because we have so many resources. We make a lot of everything. So, now, oddly, you're not going to make what you're definitely absolutely the best at. You're going to make what you're relatively better at. So we're going to have to introduce these concepts called absolute and comparative advantage. An absolute advantage is a country can make more of both something than another country. A comparative advantage is when a country loses less of the other thing when they produce one thing. So if you're going to produce something, that means you're not producing something else. And what we want to focus on in this chapter is how much of, if you specialize in one thing, how much of the other good aren't you making? And we're going to let the country make a good by which you lose the least amount of the other thing, and that's a comparative advantage. Just for trivia's sake, here's some numbers of what we trade with other countries. So we export the most to Canada, $312 billion to Canada. Number 2 is $240 billion to Mexico. 3 is we export 123 to China. 4 is $66 billion to Japan in dollars. Things we make that we sell there. So they get the goods, but we get the money. And then 5 is the United Kingdom, $53 billion worth of goods. That's excluding the European Union, because it's made up of many different countries. If you include all of those countries as one entity, the European Union is the second largest entity we export goods to, $276 billion. We import goods, though, and the country we import the most goods from is China, $447 billion. European Union, again, is second if you treat all those countries as one entity. But if you just deal with individual countries, Canada is the second largest country we trade with, that we import from, $348 billion. Mexico, $294 billion. That makes sense. They're right on our border. They're unguarded borders, so trade happens easily. Japan is the fourth country we import goods from, $134 billion, and fifth is Germany, $123 billion worth of imports. We run trade deficits or surpluses as a result. So you can see that we're running a trade deficit overall. We import $795 billion more than we export, imports being 2.3 and exports being 1.5 billion. We run a trade deficit with the European Union of $151 billion, a trade deficit with China of $375 billion. We chronically run trade deficits, importing more than we export. There's another file posted online that explains the procedure of how to do these comparative advantage problems. So if you, as I'm explaining it, you might want to have this and go through it and make, we want to do some practice problems of your own, making sure that you can do it. And this will guide you as you do it. All the steps are on here. It's posted online. So let's do some comparative advantage problems.